What if you woke up one day and realized you were invisible? Not in the supernatural sense, but in the slow, creeping, everyday way. The way where you exist in a house, but no one really sees you. You make the coffee, you pay the bills, you clean the floors, and you become just another part of the home's quiet machinery. An appliance. Useful, reliable, and utterly taken for granted. This is the story of Helen Richards. And on a crisp October morning, deep in the mountains with the scent of pine and decay in the air, Helen, at 54 years old, was desperately trying to become visible again. She paused, leaning heavily on her hiking pole, and fumbled with the knot on her boot. Her hands, which had once deftly handled 4 lines and sutures, were now clumsy. This was her first solo trip in, God, how long? 20 years? Longer? An elderly man, stacking soda bottles in a tiny convenience store at the base of the mountain, had watched her get out of her car. He called out with a look of genuine concern, "Weather's turning, ma'am. You sure you want to go up alone?" Helen had just smiled, a polite, empty smile she perfected over 2 decades. She nodded, but she didn't really want to be careful. In fact, a dark, quiet part of her, a part she barely admitted to herself, was hoping something would happen. Anything. A storm, a challenge, a disruption. Anything to break the crushing, silent monotony of her life. You see, Helen had a life that, on paper, looked perfect. For her family, she had willingly, or so she told herself, stepped away from a demanding but fulfilling career as a nurse. She became a full-time housewife, a domestic engineer, the CEO of the Richards household, and for 20 years, she had excelled at her post. Her husband, Ken, was a man devoted entirely to 2 things, his work and his weekend golf game. He was a good provider, but he was emotionally absent. He moved through their beautiful, sterile home like a ghost in a polo shirt, leaving behind a scent of expensive cologne and a faint trail of assumptions that she would handle everything. Their only son, Ryan, was a success story, already independent, living 3 states away, carving out his own life. He was a good son, she supposed. He called on holidays. He'd text a few times a month, usually when he needed something or wanted to share a victory. But he didn't need her. Not anymore. Helen's life had become a masterclass in serving others. Her own time, her own desires, her own self. It had all just evaporated at some point. She hadn't even noticed it go. It was death by 1,000 tiny concessions. The question had started as a whisper and had recently become a roar in the silence of her afternoons. What am I living for? This profound, terrifying emptiness had finally taken hold. And then at a dentist's office, she'd seen it, a thick, glossy mountaineering magazine. The cover showed a woman, about her age, standing on a rocky summit, arms raised, her face alive with exhaustion and triumph. It was like a jolt of electricity. It reminded her of the woman she used to be, the Helen who climbed, who dared, who felt, the Helen before Ken. Now, 2 hours into the hike, that woman felt very, very far away. Helen's steps were heavy. Her lungs burned. The 20-year gap wasn't a gap. It was a chasm. She was out of breath, her legs unsteady, her expensive new hiking boots already raising blisters. Every step was a brutal reminder of her physical decline. But she kept walking. She pushed past the pain. Because stopping, even for a second, felt like a surrender. Stopping felt like the oppressive weight of her everyday life. The laundry, the silent dinners, the endless, empty hours would finally catch up, wrap around her ankles, and drag her right back down. The mountain hut, a tiny speck on her map, was supposed to be just over the next ridge. She was so close. She stopped to check the map, pulling it from her pocket. She shifted her weight, and that's when it happened. The ground beneath her right foot, a patch of damp leaves hiding loose shale, simply vanished. There was no time to scream. Just a sudden, sickening lurch of weightlessness, and then a chaotic, violent tumble. She wasn't just falling. She was rolling, crashing through prickly undergrowth, the world a dizzying blur of green and brown. A sharp, jutting rock met her ankle, and she heard, more than felt, a wet, sickening pop. She finally slid to a stop, wedged deep in a rocky, shadowed valley, far off the marked trail. For a moment, there was only silence, the silence of the deep woods. She was alive. She tried to push herself up. A bolt of white-hot, agonizing pain shot from her right ankle, up her leg, and exploded behind her eyes. Ouch! The cry was pathetic, swallowed instantly by the trees. She looked down. Her ankle was already swelling, a grotesque, purple knot forming beneath her sock. Panic cold and sharp, began to claw at her throat. She fumbled for her phone in her pocket. The screen was cracked, but it lit up. No. Signal. Of course. She was out of the service area, deep in a ravine, surrounded by sheer, rocky slopes that prickled her skin even as she looked at them. For the first time that day, Helen felt true, primal fear. Not the existential dread of her empty house, but the visceral, animal terror of the wild. She might die here. But before the grief of that thought could even settle, an even colder, lonelier realization washed over it. Who would even look for her? Ken was on a business trip. He wouldn't be home tonight, or tomorrow. He wouldn't even notice she was gone until Monday. And even then, he'd probably just assume she was at the spa or visiting a friend. Ryan? If she managed to send a text, he'd probably just be annoyed. Mom, what were you thinking? You're not 20 anymore. You're not acting like a mother. The reality of it hit her like a physical blow. No one was coming. No one even knew she was gone. Darkness began to fall, not slowly, but like a thick, black blanket being pulled over the valley. The temperature plummeted. The pain in her ankle was a roaring fire, but it was nothing compared to the icy, desolate pain in her heart. She was utterly, completely alone. And just as she was about to surrender to the tears, she heard it. Crunch. Snap. Footsteps. Coming down the slope. Hello. A man's voice. Low, slightly hushed, but clear. Is someone down there? Hope, so violent it choked her, surged in her chest. Helen tried to yell, but all that came out was a dry, desperate croak. Here. I'm here. Help me. A moment later, a figure appeared through the gloom, moving with a confidence that seemed impossible on this terrain. He was a man, maybe in his late 40s. Tan face, a rough, warrior's beard, and he was dressed in practical, worn-in climbing gear. He held a powerful flashlight, and its beam cut through the dark and landed on her. His eyes, deep-set and sharp, seemed to take in the entire situation in a single glance. Are you okay? He asked, scrambling the last few feet to her side. I think I broke my ankle, Helen whispered, the relief making her dizzy. Okay, don't move. He knelt beside her, his movements economical and precise. I'm gonna take a look. This might hurt. He gently, firmly, examined her ankle with practiced hands. His touch was surprisingly gentle, and despite the pain, Helen felt a small, unfamiliar wave of relief. He wasn't panicked. He was in control. Well, he said, his voice calm. It doesn't feel like the bone is shattered, but it's a bad sprain. A very bad one. You're not walking on this. Oh, God, she whimpered. It's all right. My hut is about a click from here, just over the ridge. We can't stay here. The temperature is dropping fast. I'll call for a helicopter in the morning. For tonight, you'll be safe with me. He introduced himself, his name a simple statement of fact. I'm Aaron Cole. I manage the mountain hut up top. Used to be a guide. Now I just keep the place running. I'm Helen. Well, Helen, in the mountains, we help each other. Now, this is going to be a bit awkward, but it's the fastest way. I'm going to carry you. Before she could protest, he configured his pack and crouched in front of her. On 3. 1, 2, 3. He lifted her onto his back with an ease that shocked her. His back was broad, solid, and incredibly warm. As he began the arduous climb back up the slope, Helen held on, her face pressed against the rough fabric of his jacket. She could feel the steady heat of his body, the rhythmic flex of his muscles. It had been years, decades, since she had been this close to a man, since she had felt, quite literally, supported. The scent of pine, wood smoke, and sweat filled her senses. And for the first time in 20 years, Helen Richards didn't feel invisible at all. The climb was a blur of pain, embarrassment, and a strange, detached sense of observation. Helen was acutely aware of every single thing. The solid, unyielding strength of the man carrying her, the scrape of his boots on the rock, the rhythmic puff of his breath in the cold air. He didn't grunt or complain. He just moved, a steady, powerful engine of man, hauling her up a slope she could barely have managed on her own 2 feet. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 20 minutes before they crested the ridge. And there it was, nestled in a small clearing, was the mountain hut. It was not what she expected. It wasn't a sleek, modern A-frame or a dilapidated shack. It was small, solid, and looked like it had grown from the mountain itself. Built of thick, dark logs, with a plume of white smoke rising straight up from a stone chimney into the darkening sky. It looked real. It looked warm. Aaron shifted her weight and grunted as he gently deposited her on the small wooden porch, leaning her against the wall. All right, just a second. Let me get the door. He pushed the heavy wooden door open, and a wave of warmth and light washed over her. The smell of wood smoke, coffee, and something savory she couldn't place. He disappeared inside, and a moment later, the interior lights flickered on, casting a golden, inviting glow. Okay, Helen, let's get you inside. He was back at her side, one arm around her waist, the other under her arm, half lifting, half guiding her as she hopped painfully on her good foot. The inside of the hut was one simple, large room. It was a complete opposite her home. Her house was all white walls, clean lines, and cold, minimalist furniture. This place was full of wood. The walls were rough-hewn timber. The floor was wide planks, worn smooth by time. There was a large black cast-iron stove in one corner, radiating a cozy, intense heat. A simple kitchenette lined one wall, with cast-iron pans hanging from hooks. A sturdy wooden table with 2 chairs sat in the middle. On the far side, a built-in bed piled high with thick wool blankets. It was simple, functional, and humming with a life her own home completely lacked. Here, Aaron said, guiding her to the bed, "Sit down. Let's get that boot off and have a proper look." He knelt in front of her. The simple, domestic act felt shockingly intimate. "This is probably going to hurt," he warned again. He was methodical. He unlaced her boot with steady fingers, his touch impersonal yet incredibly careful. As he eased the boot off, she had to bite her lip to stop from crying out. Her sock was already soaked with a mix of sweat and blood. He gently peeled the sock away. "Ah, yeah, that's a good one." The swelling was severe, the bruising a dark, angry purple. "Doesn't look broken, like I said, but you've torn some ligaments for sure." He stood and went to a rustic cabinet, pulling out a first aid kit that looked professional grade. He also grabbed a metal basin, which he filled with cold water from a tap in the kitchen. "This is going to be cold," he said. He placed the basin on the floor and gently lifted her foot and placed it in the icy water. Helen hissed. "It's fine," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It'll help with the swelling." He worked with a quiet efficiency that reminded her of her old colleagues in the ER. He wrapped her ankle firmly with an elastic bandage, his hands moving with an expertise that was both comforting and, for some reason, deeply attractive. "There, that's the best we can do for now. Keep the ice on it for a bit, then we elevate." He settled her back against a pile of pillows on the bed, propping her injured foot on a rolled-up blanket. He handed her 2 pills and a tin cup of water, painkillers. She took them gratefully, the silent stretching, filled only by the crackle of the fire. He was a stranger, and he had just saved her. She didn't even know his last name. "My name is Helen Richards," she said, her voice sounding thin. He looked up from where he was stoking the fire. "Aaron Cole," he replied, nodding. "Well, Helen Richards, you've had a rough day." He pulled one of the wooden chairs over and sat near the bed, but not too near. He gave her space. "You've been climbing alone long, Helen?" he asked. His tone wasn't judgmental. It was just curious. "No. Yes. She fumbled for an answer. How could she explain? How could she tell this capable, self-sufficient man that she, a 54-year-old woman, had come up a mountain hoping for a disaster? "It's been a while," she said, settling on a half-truth. "It was a bit reckless. I used to climb a lot. When I was younger." "I see." He just watched her, his gaze steady. She felt an absurd urge to justify herself, to explain the emptiness, the invisibility, the husband who golfed, the son who was gone. I just needed to get away," she said. "I used to be different. I used to feel free," he supplied, his voice quiet. Her head snapped up. She looked at him, really looked at him. His eyes weren't just sharp, they were sad. There was a deep, settled loneliness in them that she recognized. It was the same loneliness that lived in her own house, just a different flavor. "Yes," she whispered. "Free. Right now," she began, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "My life is all about serving other people, making sure everything runs. And I just..." She shut her mouth abruptly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't. You don't need to hear this. I'm just complaining." "It's all right," Aaron said. The words were simple, but his voice was kind. And in that moment, that kindness, that simple validation from a stranger, made her eyes burn. "I understand," he added. And the strange thing was, she believed he actually did. He stood up, breaking the intensity of the moment. "You must be hungry." I don't have much. Canned stew and some bread, but it's hot. That sounds wonderful, she said, and she meant it. Dinner was a simple affair. He brought her a tray with a steaming bowl of beef stew, a thick slice of crusty bread, and another cup, this one filled with hot, black coffee. He sat at the small table, eating his own. The stew was rich and salty, and it warmed her from the inside out. They ate in a comfortable silence for a few minutes. It was so different from the loaded, empty silences at her own dinner table with Ken, where the only sounds were the clinking of silverware and the 6 o'clock news. "You live here?" she asked, gesturing around the hut. "All the time." Aaron's expression clouded over, just for a second. "For about 3 years now," he said, pushing a piece of beef around his bowl. "Why?" she asked, bolder now. He looked up, and his eyes met hers. The deep sadness she glimpsed earlier was right on the surface now. "I lost my wife," he said simply. "Mika, she loved these mountains." He paused. "I came here to be close to her, I guess. After..." He didn't need to finish. "I'm so sorry," Helen said, her own problems feeling suddenly small and petty. "I got used to it," he said, but his voice was hollow. "It's easier being alone." But the words held no persuasive power. They were a lie, he told himself, and Helen knew it instantly. She was surrounded by family, and she was lonely. He was completely isolated, and he was lonely. They were just two different kinds of the same crushing weight. As the night deepened, the atmosphere in the hut shifted. Outside, the wind had picked up. It howled around the corners of the small building, a low, mournful sound that occasionally made the whole structure crease. Aaron had cleared their dishes, and now they just sat. Helen on the bed, her leg propped up, Aaron in his chair, nursing another coffee. "Is it always this cold?" she asked, pulling the wool blanket tighter around her shoulders. "The mountain night is unforgiving," he said. "Colder than you'd imagine, even inside." She shivered. "Let's add some more firewood," he said, and made to stand up. "Aaron," Helen said, and instinctively, she reached out and grabbed his hand to stop him. He froze. His hand was large, warm and rough, calloused. It was the hand of a man who worked, who built things and fixed things. It had been so long, so very long, since she had felt the simple, uncomplicated warmth of a man's hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "For what?" he asked, his gaze fixed on her hand, which was still resting on his. For helping me, for the stew, for listening." He turned his hand over and gently, almost imperceptibly, squeezed hers. "It's okay, Helen." He let go and stood up to tend the fire, but the touch lingered, a small spark in the cold, dark room. "When the rescue helicopter comes tomorrow," he said, his back to her as he added a log to the stove, "you'll go back to your normal life." "Is that so?" she replied, the question hanging in the air. He turned, the firelight flickering across his face. "Is it?" Helen couldn't answer. To be honest, the thought of returning to that silent, sterile house, to her invisibility, made her feel sick. "I don't know," she whispered. Silence fell between them again, a different kind of silence this time, heavier, more complicated. "Aaron," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind, I don't think I have a place to go back to." Outside, the wind howled. Inside, there was only the sound of fire and two lonely people breathing in the dark. So, picture that room. Picture the weight of that confession. "I don't think I have a place to go back to." What do you even say to that? What Aaron did was almost more powerful than anything he could have said. He didn't ask 1,000 prying questions. He didn't offer platitudes or try to fix her life. He just accepted it. He gave a slow, deep nod. Then he stood up, put another log on the fire, and let her words hang in the warm, safe air of the hut, letting them just be. He unrolled a thick bedroll and a couple of blankets on the floor near the hearth. "You take the bed," he said, and it wasn't suggestion. "Oh, no, I can't. It's you're injured, Helen. Take the bed. I'll be fine here." And that was that. She lay down, the thick wool blanket smelling faintly of wood smoke and cedar. The hut was a fortress against the howling wind. It was small, it was rustic, but it was the safest she had felt in 20 years. She fully expected to lie awake all night, her mind racing, her ankle throbbing. But as she lay there, something strange happened. She listened. She heard the wind screaming outside, a lonely, wild sound. She heard the steady, comforting crackle and pop of the fire. And from the floor, just a few feet away, she heard the quiet, rhythmic breathing of another human being. A man, a stranger. And yet, she wasn't afraid. The sound of his breathing was an anchor. It was a simple, living proof that she was not, at that exact moment, alone in the universe. And that night, for the first time in as long as she could remember, Helen slept. It wasn't a fitful, shallow sleep, interrupted by thoughts of laundry lists and her husband's tea times. It was a deep, dreamless, almost primal sleep, a sleep of true exhaustion, and, more importantly, of true security. When she woke, she was afraid, just for a second, afraid that the morning light meant the helicopter. It meant the end of this sanctuary. It meant going back. The morning light streamed in through the hut's single, clean window. For a split second, she had no idea where she was. This wasn't her sterile, gray and white bedroom. Then the smells hit her. Fresh, strong coffee, wood smoke, and she saw him, Aaron. He was already up, dressed, moving quietly by the kitchenette, pouring hot water into a mug. He hadn't been a dream. The fall to rescue this man, it was all real. Her ankle was a dull, throbbing ache, much better than the night before, but she knew walking was still impossible. She stirred and he turned. "Good morning," he said. His voice was a little rough from sleep, and it was nice. "How's the ankle?" It's better, I think. Thank you." He brought her a steaming tin mug of coffee. It was black and scalding hot. "Breakfast is simple," he said. "Toast." He'd made toast in a cast-iron pan over the stove, and he brought her a slice on a small plate, along with a jar of what looked like homemade jam. They ate a quiet, simple meal, and the time just passed. It flowed. It wasn't the frantic, empty rush of her mornings back home, where she'd make a huge breakfast for her husband who just grunted behind a newspaper, and then clean it all up in a silent kitchen. This was slow, calm. Finally, she had to ask. The question felt like a stone in her stomach. "So, are you calling a helicopter today?" Aaron, who had been looking out the window, turned. His expression was troubled. I already did. Helen, while you were sleeping. I got the ranger station on the radio. And," she said, her heart hammering, "and the weather, a sudden front moved in overnight. It's a mess out there. The forecast is bad. They're predicting heavy rain, maybe even early snow at this altitude." He met her eyes. "They can't fly today, Helen. It's too dangerous. They're going to try again tomorrow, if the window opens up." A beat of silence. This was it. This was the moment she was supposed to be frantic. "What do you mean? You have to get me out of here. What about my family?" But those words didn't come. Instead, a slow, deep, and incredibly guilty wave of relief washed over her. One more day. She was getting one more day. "Oh," she said, looking down into her empty mug. "I see. Well, nothing to be done about it, then." Aaron looked at her, surprised by her lack of panic. He clearly expected a different reaction. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it's an inconvenience. I'm sure you need to get back." Helen looked up, and for the first time, she was completely honest, maybe more honest than she'd been in a decade. "No," she said, her voice quiet. It's really not an inconvenience." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "To be honest, I'm glad for the company." And in that moment, she saw his own mask of rugged self-sufficiency crack. "Yeah," he said, turning back to the window. "Me too. It's been a long time since I've had a real, proper conversation with anyone." And so their strange, suspended-in-time day began. Helen was, by necessity, trapped inside. Her ankle made her a prisoner of the hut. But the hut, she was discovering, was a fascinating place. It was his place. And she watched him. He wasn't a man who could sit still. The worsening weather meant work. He was preparing for the storm. She watched from the window, or from the chair he'd pulled up for her by the fire. She watched him chop wood. He didn't use a hydraulic splitter like her neighbor. He used a heavy, well-worn axe, and he moved with a fluid, powerful economy of motion. The thwack of the axe, the crack of wood splitting, it was the most real sound she'd ever heard. He checked the seals on the window. He climbed onto the roof, in the wind, mind you, to clear a branch in the chimney flue. He secured a loose fence post at the edge of the clearing, his movements all competence and quiet focus. He was a man who knew how to do things. A man who could fix things. Helen thought of her husband, Ken. Ken, who called a handyman to change a light bulb. Ken, whose idea of work was a 4-hour battle with a golf ball. Ken, who provided, but who wasn't capable. Not like this. And Helen watched Aaron, this man who lived alone, who had, by societal standards, nothing, and she realized he was the most capable man she had ever met. She found herself in a deep philosophical hole. Who was actually happier? Or maybe not happier. Who was more alive? Was it her? Surrounded by a family, living in a beautiful, expensive, sterile box, but who was so desperately lonely she was invisible? Or was it him? A man truly, physically alone. A man who had clearly lost the love of his life, but a man who lived with purpose, who was in a constant, active relationship with the world around him. He fought the weather. He tended his home. He existed in a way that was real. She realized she didn't know the answer, but she knew which one she'd rather be. He came back inside in the early afternoon, stomping the first few wet flakes of snow from his boots. The temperature had dropped again. "Looks like we're in for it," he said, his face flushed from the cold. He made them lunch. A simple soup from a can, but he added some wild herbs he had dry in the rafters and served it with more of the crusty bread. They ate at the small table, the storm now raging outside. The rain and sleet hammered against the roof, but inside it was just warm. The silence wasn't empty. It was comfortable, and Helen, filled with a new, strange courage, the courage of someone who had already fallen down a mountain and had nothing left to lose, decided to ask. "Aaron," he looked up, a spoonful of soup halfway to his mouth. Can I ask you about your wife? You said her name was Mika." He froze. He put the spoon down. He stared into his bowl for a long, long moment. Helen was afraid she'd broken spell, that she'd gone too far. Finally, he spoke. His voice was so quiet, she had to lean in to hear him over the storm. Her name was Mika. He looked up, but his eyes were 1,000 miles away and 3 years in the past. She loved this. All of it. The wind. The danger. She loved the mountains more than I did. She was 42. Was it an accident? Helen asked, her voice just as quiet. He nodded, his throat working. Yes, an avalanche. On a tour I was guiding. He looked down at his hands on the table, and Helen saw, to her shock, that they were trembling. "I misread the conditions," he whispered. I was the guide. Her guide. She trusted me. They all did. And it was my own mistake. My fault. Helen's heart just broke. This was the source of it. This was the man beneath the competence. A man drowning in a sea of guilt. "That's why you quit being a guide," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," he choked out. I had no right to be responsible for anyone's life." And in that moment, the nurse in Helen, the human in her, took over. She reached across the small table and instinctively, gently, covered his trembling hand with her own. He flinched, but didn't pull away. "But Aaron," she said, her voice firm but kind, "you saved me. Yesterday you saved my life. Without you, I would have died down there." He stared at her hand on his. His eyes, my God, his eyes. It was the look of a man who hadn't been touched with kindness in 3 long, cold years. He slowly pulled his hand from beneath hers. Not a rejection, but a retreat. He stood up, needing the space, needing to break the intensity. "Your family," he said, his voice rough as he turned to the window. They must be worried sick." And Helen looked at his back, at the strong, broken man, and she gave that same sad, wry smile she felt earlier. "I wonder," she said. He turned, and she held his gaze. "I don't know if anyone is even waiting for me to come home," she said, echoing her confession from the night before. A new, electric silence crackled between them. "Aaron," she said, her voice soft, Do you enjoy talking to me?" His answer was immediate, instant, almost desperate. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I do." His yes wasn't just a word. It was an exhale. It was the sound of a man who had been holding his breath for 3 years, finally letting it go. It landed in the small, warm hut with a physical weight. "Yes, I do," he'd said. "I enjoy talking to you." And in that simple admission, Helen heard the echo of her own desperate loneliness. It was the first time in 3 years he'd had a real conversation. It was the first time in 20 years that she had. She didn't know what to say to that. Me Too felt so small, so inadequate. So she just nodded, and a small, fragile understanding formed between them. There were 2 people who'd been shipwrecked for a very, very long time, and had just, against all odds, washed up on the same tiny, isolated beach. And as if their joint confession had broken some seal on the world, the weather, which had been holding its breath, finally unleashed itself. The rain started in the afternoon. This wasn't a gentle, cleansing rain. This was a deluge. It came in horizontal sheets, driven by a wind that moaned like a living thing. The raindrops didn't just tap on the roof. They pounded, a relentless, deafening drumbeat that turned the world outside the window into a blurry, watercolor mess of green and gray. Well, Aaron said, staring out the window, his arms crossed. The helicopter definitely isn't flying in this. That's right, Helen replied, and she was shocked by the sound of her own voice. There was no impatience in it, no anxiety. No, what am I going to do? Instead, as the storm raged and the world outside was erased, she felt a profound, almost primal sense of security. The hut was no longer a temporary shelter. It was an ark. It was the only solid, warm, real place in the entire universe. The storm wasn't trapping her in. It was sealing her off. It was sealing off the empty house, the absent husband, the demands of a life she didn't want. The real world, with all its expectations and disappointments, had been completely and totally washed away. For today, she was just here. The afternoon passed in a strange domestic bubble. Helen, true to her nature, couldn't stand being useless. Aaron, please, she said. I'm going to go crazy if I just sit here like an invalid. Isn't there something I can do? He'd looked at her, a small, amused smile touching the corners of his mouth. He was in the middle of cleaning and oiling some of his climbing gear. He gestured to his open first aid pack. Well, he said, I was restocking. My bandage rolls are a mess. If your hands are bored. Yes, she said, with more enthusiasm than the task deserved. And so, an odd, quiet harmony settled over the room. Aaron sat by the fire, his large, calloused hands working with surprising delicacy, oiling the metal parts of a climbing harness. Helen sat on the bed, her leg propped up, her own hands, the hands of a nurse, hands that had gone soft from years of housekeeping, rediscovering their old, forgotten muscle memory. She took the jumbled pile of elastic bandages and, one by one, rolled them into tight, perfect, professional-grade cylinders. It was the most content she had felt in 2 decades. They talked, not about their deep, dark traumas, but about things. You're good at that, he said, nodding at her perfectly rolled bandages. I was a nurse, she said, the words feeling strange on her tongue. I gave it up when my son, Ryan, was born. Full-time mom. Full-time, everything else. Do you miss it? He asked, his eyes not on her, but on his work, which made it easier to answer. I thought I didn't, she said, smoothing a wrinkle in the fabric. I told myself I didn't. But, yes, I miss being useful. I miss being the person who knew what to do. He just nodded. He didn't say, but being a mom is the most important job. He didn't offer a platitude. He just accepted it. And she watched him work, watched the way his hands moved, the focus in his eyes. He was a man who lived in a constant state of doing, tending the fire, fixing his gear, securing his home. He was a complete, self-contained unit. And she realized she had never, not once, seen her husband, Ken, fix anything. Not a leaky faucet, not a broken shelf, not even a simple meal. The light in the hut began to fade as evening approached. The storm hadn't let up. If anything, it was worse. The wind was a physical force, shaking the small building in its fist. I need to stand up, Helen announced, more to herself than to him. She'd been sitting for hours, and her entire body felt stiff. Easy, Aaron said, standing up from his chair by the fire. Let me help you. No, she said, a flash of her old independence returning. I'm fine. I need to move a little. She pushed herself up, using the wooden bed frame for support, carefully put her weight on her one good foot. See? I'm fine. Just wanted to look out the window. She was unsteady, but she was up. She took one small, hopping step, and that's when the pain would have been a dull, manageable throb, decided to remind her who was in charge. A white-hot, electric jolt shot from her ankle straight to her hip. Ah! Her good leg buckled. Her balance was gone. She wasn't just stumbling. She was falling. She didn't even have time to cry out. He moved. He wasn't the calm, methodical rescuer from the ravine. He wasn't the quiet, sad man by the fire. He was just fast. He crossed a small distance between them in a single, lunging step. He didn't catch her. He collided with her. Helen's full body weight slammed into his chest. His arms, strong as steel bands, snapped around her, one high across her back, the other low on her waist, holding her, crushing her against him. Her face was buried in the rough flannel of his shirt, and she stopped. She just stopped. For a second, the only sounds in the universe were the pounding rain, the howling wind, and the sudden, frantic thump-thump-thump of his heart, right against her ear. Her senses exploded. He was so warm, a living furnace against the cold. And the smell, it was the smell from the ravine, but stronger, wood smoke, the sharp, clean scent of the cold air he'd been in. And just him, a warm, male scent that she hadn't been close to in so long. It was intoxicating. A long-forgotten, dormant feeling. A feeling she thought had died 20 years ago, uncoiled deep inside her. A heavy, liquid warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. In his arms, with the storm raging outside, Helen Richards, 54-year-old invisible wife and mother, felt herself as a woman, and he was frozen. She could feel the tension in his muscles. His hands were locked in place, holding her tight. He was breathing, but it was shallow. He was as shocked as she was. They didn't try to separate. For 1, 2, 3 long seconds, they just stayed. Two human beings, holding on in a storm. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. His voice was a low, rough rumble. "No, are you okay? Your ankle?" "I'm fine," she breathed. "I just lost my balance." "I've got you." Slowly. So slowly he loosened his grip. He didn't let go, but he eased her back, his hand still on her waist, on her arm, steadying her. He helped her back to the bed. His touch was electric. His fingers lingered on her arm for half a second too long. It was done. The line had been crossed. Neither of them said a word. Aaron turned his back to her. He walked to the small kitchen counter, placed both hands flat on the wooden surface, and just stood there. His back rose and fell with a single, deep breath. Helen sat on the edge of bed, her entire body thrumming. Her heart was a trapped bird in her chest. Dinner that night was different. He made stew again. Canned stew, heated over the stove. They sat at the small table, just as they had the night before. But the silence was no longer sad. It was no longer comfortable. It was electric. It was so loud. It was almost deafening. Every time she felt his gaze on her, she felt it like a physical touch. Every time he cleared his throat, she jumped. The air in the small hut was thick, charged, and full of unspoken awareness. Outside, the storm howled, but inside, a much more dangerous and much more beautiful storm was just beginning. So, dinner is over, and the silence that follows, it isn't just silence. It's a thing. It's a living, breathing entity in the small, warm hut. It's a high-voltage cable humming in the air between them, stretched so tight that a single wrong move, a single misplaced word, will make it snap and spark. Every tiny movement, every small sound, is amplified to the volume of a gunshot. Aaron clearing his throat. Helen shifting her weight on the bed. The clink of his spoon as he drops it into the metal basin. They are painfully aware of each other. The storm outside is a roaring, chaotic symphony, but inside the hut, the loudest sound by far is their own breathing. Aaron finally stands, breaking the spell of the table. He moves to the small kitchenette, his back to her. It's a back she now knows the feel of. Strong, solid, warm. He starts, and his voice is a bit too loud, a bit too forced. "It looks like it's going to be cold again tonight. Helen's heart is a trapped bird." "That's right," she manages, her own voice barely a whisper. I'll stack some extra firewood by the stove," he says, his hands busy, needing a task, needing anything to do. But here's the thing. They both know firewood isn't going to fix the kind of cold that's in that room. The cold is just an excuse. The real problem, the real pressure in the air, is the heat. And so, the ritual of the night before repeats, only now a complete and utter charade. Night has fallen completely. The storm is a howling, angry beast, slamming itself against a little hut, which just stubbornly, warmly stands its ground. Aaron unrolls his thick bedroll on the floor by the fire. Helen settles into the bed, pulling the thick wool blankets up to her chin. It's the same physical arrangement as last night, but emotionally, they might as well be on a different planet. Aaron extinguishes the main lantern, leaving only the demonic, flickering dance of firelight to paint the walls in shadows of orange and black. And they lie there. They lie there in the dark, not 10 feet apart. And they listen. They listen to the storm. And they listen to each other not sleeping. An hour passes, an hour that feels like a decade. Every pop from the fire, every creak of the log settling, is a universe of tension. Helen's ankle is a dull throb, but her heart is a roaring fire. Finally, his voice. It comes out of the darkness, low and rough, and it cuts straight through the tension. Helen, you can't sleep, can you? She lets out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding for the last hour. No, she whispers. A beat. You either. A rustle of his blankets. No. Another long, agonizing pause. And then the sound of him moving. The sound of him standing up. He doesn't turn on a light. He doesn't need to. He moves through the firelit shadows, a large, dark shape, and he sits not on the bed. He sits on the edge of the sturdy wooden chair he'd used earlier, pulling it close to her bedside. He is being respectful, but he is there. How's your ankle? He asks, his voice a low rumble. It's much better, she whispers. He's so close now. So close. She could feel the heat radiating off him. So close. She can smell that scent again, wood smoke, pine, and him. It's cold, isn't it? She says, a pathetic excuse, pulling the blanket tighter around her. Yes, he says. The mountain night. Another beat of silence. Here, he says. Your foot is outside the blanket. She looks down, and it is. Her injured foot, propped on its pillow, has slipped out from under the covers. And before she can react, before she can even think, he leans forward, and he gently touches her, his hand. It's a shock, not an electric shock, a thermal one. His hand, the one that chops wood, the one that saved her from the ravine, is so rough, so calloused, and so incredibly, unbelievably warm. It rests, just for a second, on her foot. My God, Helen, he murmurs, his voice thick. You're an ice block. He looks up, and his eyes find hers in the dark. Shall I warm it up? What does she say to that? What can she say? This is a precipice. And she knows it. She can't speak. Her throat has closed. So she just nods. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement in the shadows. It's all the answer he needs. He takes his other hand, and he wraps both of his large, strong, working man's hands around her foot, just at the ankle. And the warmth. It isn't just warmth. It's life. It's a jolt of pure, liquid energy that travels from her ankle, not just up her leg, but through her entire dormant, sleeping body. It settles, heavy and low, deep in her stomach. It feels wonderful. A small, involuntary sound escapes her. A sigh, a hum, a soften. It's a sound of pure, unadulterated pleasure. A sound she hasn't heard herself make. In 20 years, he hears that sound, and it changes everything. His hand, which was just holding her ankle, now begins to move. It's not fast. It's not aggressive. It is the slowest, most deliberate exploration in the history of the world. His thumb just rubs a small, slow circle on her skin, right above the bandage. And then his hand slides. It slides up from her ankle, over the thin, soft fabric of the hiking pants she's still wearing. It moves to her calf, and it just rests there, his entire palm, a brand of pure heat, cupping the muscle of her leg. Helen's heart is not a bird anymore. It's a trip hammer. It's a drum, pounding against her ribs. She is holding her breath. She is paralyzed, and then his hand moves again, slowly, deliberately, up to her knee, and it stops. His hand just rests there, on her knee, his thumb on the inside, his fingers on the outside. He's so close. He's still on the chair, but he's leaning in, his arm outstretched. He can see her face in the firelight. He can see the flash of her eyes, and his voice is thick. Helen, he whispers. Should I stop? This is it. This is the moment. This is the exit ramp. This is her last chance to go back. To be Helen Richards, wife and mother. To be the invisible woman. All she has to do is say yes. All she has to do is say nothing. Just freeze. But the woman who hiked up a mountain to feel something, the woman who fell, the woman who has been seen by this man for 2 days, that woman is not the same person who left her sterile, empty house. She looks at him. His eyes are dark, filled with question and a hunger and a sadness that mirrors her own. And her answer, when it comes, is not a whisper. It is clear. It is firm. And it is final. No. The word hangs in the air. He lets out a breath, a shaky, shuddering breath. He stands from the chair. And he sits down on the edge of the bed. The mattress dips. The small distance between them is gone. His face is now just inches from hers. Helen, he whispers, and it's a confession. I thought I'd never be able to forget Mika. I live with her ghost every single day. And Helen whispers back. The tears finally well in her eyes. I thought I was finished. I thought I was already a ghost. But when I'm with you, he says, his voice breaking, when I'm with you, Helen, I feel alive again. His hand, his rough, warm hand, it leaves her knee, and he lifts it, not to her body. He lifts it to her face. His calloused thumb brushes a tear from her cheek. And at that touch, something that has been locked and bolted and rusted shut deep inside of Helen for 20 solid years just shatters. Aaron, she breathes. He leans in. She doesn't pull away. She doesn't flinch. She leans up, and his lips meet hers. It is not a gentle kiss. It is not soft. It is not tentative. It is 20 years of starvation. It is a man who thought he was dead, and a woman who thought she was invisible, colliding. It is desperate, and it is deep, and it is hungry. It's a kiss of bruising primal need. It is rain. It is a flash flood. It is a deluge, pouring down on a heart that has been a dry, cracked, barren desert for as long as she can remember. He embraces her, his arms pulling her up, and she wraps her arms around his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair, and she thinks, this is true warmth. This is what it feels like. It was a warmth, a fire she had never felt with her family, never with Ken. I wish the morning would never come, she cries, her voice breaking against his mouth. And Aaron Cole just groans, a deep, wounded sound. He pulls her even closer, even tighter, holding her as if she is the only real thing in the storm, holding her as if, just for tonight, she is the only thing saving him from being washed away. The morning of the third day, and it was silent. The storm, their accomplice, their noisy, violent chaperone, was gone. It had raged itself out, and in its place it left a silence so profound, so loud, that it was almost more terrifying than the wind. And light. The hut was filled with a clear, sharp, unforgiving morning light, a light that exposed everything. The dust motes in the air, the dirty coffee mugs from the day before, the reality. Helen woke up slowly, and the first thing she was aware of wasn't the light. It was the sound, a low, steady, rhythmic sound right against her ear. Thump, 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 a heartbeat. She opened her eyes. She was in his bed, and her head was resting on his chest. His arm was draped heavily over her waist. Sometime in the night, in the after, they had just fallen asleep, tangled together like lovers. It hadn't been a dream. It was real. Her entire body was a riot of sensation. She could feel the scratch of his flannel shirt against her cheek. She could feel the solid, incredible warmth of his body, a warmth that had seeped into her bones. She could feel the ache, a dull, forgotten, but deeply, deeply satisfying ache. She was alive. And then a jolt of panic. She tried to lift her head, to pull away, to put the world back in its box, and the arm around her waist just tightened gently. Don't. His voice rumbled, not from the room, but through her. It vibrated from his chest into her ear. He wasn't asleep. He had been awake, lying there, watching her. Oh, God. Good morning, he murmured. And his voice, it was different. The gravel was still there, but the deep, settled sadness that lived underneath it, it was gone. It was replaced by something warmer, lighter. Good morning, she whispered, but she couldn't look at him. She was afraid of what she would see. Regret, disappointment, but most of all, she was afraid that he would see her. See this 54-year-old woman in the harsh, revealing light of day. Helen. He said her name, and it was everything. She finally lifted her head. She pushed her tangled hair out of her eyes, and she looked at him, and it wasn't regret. It wasn't disappointment. He was just watching her with an intensity that stole her breath, a sort of dazed wonder. And then his eyes and hers drifted to the window, to the clear blue, beautiful, terrible sky. It's a sunny day, she said, and the words felt like ashes in her mouth. Yes, he said, and the warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by a sudden, cold understanding. He let go of her. The warmth was gone. He sat up, and the spell was broken. Yes, he said again, his voice flat. The helicopter. It will definitely be coming. And those words, they just hung in the air. A death sentence. A heavy, leaden weight that settled on both of their hearts. The bubble was popped. The ark was no longer sealed. The real world was waiting. The next 10 minutes were the most awkward of her entire life. It was a clumsy, fumbling ballet of two people who had just shared the most intimate act two humans can share, and who now had to figure out how to exist. How to be Aaron the guide, and Helen the hiker again. She eased herself off the bed, testing her ankle. It was still sore, but the swelling was down. She could put a little weight on it. He was already up, his back to her, and he was making coffee, as if it was any other morning. He handed her a steaming mug. His fingers brushed hers, and they both flinched, pulling their hands back as if they'd been burned. He cleared his throat. Breakfast? I have toast. Toast! Toast sounds good, she said, her voice a thin, reedy thing. He worked at the stove, his back to her, a back she now knew the feel of, the strength of, and she just watched him. He looked like a husband. He looked like a partner, like a man who was comfortable in his space, but who was now making room for someone else. He brought the chair over for her, so she could sit at the table, and she saw it. He was different. He wasn't the lonely, haunted recluse from 2 days ago. He was a man who was terrified. They sat at the small table. The sun streamed in. The silence was deafening. And she knew, if she didn't say something, if he didn't say something, they would just let this pass. They would pretend it never happened. And that, she realized, would be the real tragedy. But it was him. It was Aaron who finally broke. He put his coffee mug down. He hadn't touched his toast. He was staring at his hands. His big, rough, capable hands. Helen. She froze. Yes, Helen, about last night. Here it comes, she thought. The apology. It was a mistake. It was a storm. Her heart, which had felt so full, so alive, began to shrink. He looked up, and his eyes, my God, his eyes were wide with a raw, naked vulnerability she had not seen before. Do you regret it? He asked, and the question was so quiet, so full of fear, it barely made across the table. And she looked at this man, this good, kind, broken man, and she was honest. I'm terrified, she whispered. I'm confused, and I don't know what I am. But she met his gaze. Regret is not the word, Aaron. It's not the word at all. A breath, a shaky, shuddering breath, escaped him. He nodded, as if he'd been holding that breath for 3 years. I've never, he started, and he had to stop. He swallowed. I've never held another woman, not since Mika. Not in any way. He looked at her, his confession a torrent. For 3 years, Helen, I've been a ghost, a monument. I promised, I would never, I thought it would be a betrayal. I thought last night, I would wake up this morning and hate myself. And do you? She asked, her voice as soft as his. No, he said, and the word was a shock. That's the terrifying part. It didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt right. It felt like I was alive again. And I haven't felt alive since she died. Tears. They were just there, pooling in her eyes. And it was her turn. Aaron, she said, her hands twisting in her lap. I'm a wife. I'm a mother. I'm 54 years old. I knew that part of me. The woman was just packed away. She was in a box, in an attic. The room was closed. It was over. She took a shaky breath. And last night, you didn't just open the door. You kicked it down. You turned on all the lights. And she looked at him, the tears now rolling hot down her cheeks. No, Aaron, I don't regret it. I am so happy just to know that she's still in there, that I am still in there. And when she said it, when she laid her own soul bare on that small, sunlit table, she saw it, the change in him. It was like a switch. The last of the shadows, the last of the ghosts, just fled from his eyes, and they were just clear. They were alive. They were filled with color. A man who'd been living in black and white had just, in that instant, seen the world in full, vibrant Technicolor. He reached across the table, and he took her hand. His grip was strong, not violent, not possessive, just certain, and crack. A sound, a horrible electronic crackle. They both jumped. It was the sound of the radio. He had left it on standby, and a voice, a tinny metallic, real-world voice, cut through the sacred quiet of the hut. Hut 4, this is Ranger Station. Hut 4, do you copy? We're showing a clear weather window. Aaron's hand dropped hers. He looked at the radio. He looked at her, and the color, the life, all of it just drained from his face. He stood up. He walked over to the radio, as if he were walking to his own execution. He picked up the receiver. This is Hut 4. I copy. We're good to fly, Aaron. How's the patient? He looked at Helen, and she wasn't Helen anymore. She was the patient. The patient is stable, he said, his voice a dead, hollow thing. Ankle, a severe sprain. Requesting extraction. You got it, buddy. We'll have the bird in the air in 20. Should be at your location. Say, 1,400 hours? 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock. The words hit Helen like a punch to the gut. Just a few more hours. Aaron couldn't speak. He just stood there, holding the receiver. Aaron, you copy? 1,400 hours. He finally found his voice. Yes, copy. 1,400 hours. He clicked off the radio. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, his back to her, one hand resting on the wall. The silence that filled the hut now was the silence of death, the silence of the end. Finally he turned, and his face was a mask. The man who had been alive 5 minutes ago was gone. The guide, the professional, was back. They're coming, he said. When? She whispered. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was just after 10 a.m. 2 o'clock, he said. This afternoon. The countdown had begun. What do you do with 4 hours? For hours. 10 a.m. The clock on the wall, would have been a quiet, rustic decoration for the past 2 days, was suddenly a ticking bomb. 240 minutes. They stood there, in the wreckage of their confession, the tinny voice on the radio still hanging in the air, and it was agonizing. This was, without a doubt, the worst part. The storm, the fall, the confession, that was all chaos and fire. This was a cold, sterile, operating theater reality of the end. They tried. They really did. They tried to be normal. I should pack my things, Helen said, her voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. Yes, Aaron said. Right. She moved. He moved. She hobbled over to the small pack she arrived with, which seemed like a lifetime ago. He went to the sink, and he just washed the breakfast dishes. An aggressively normal, mundane task. Scrub, rinse, clink. Every sound was a second, ticking away. She folded the one spare shirt she'd brought. She checked her phone, still no signal, still useless. She tried to put her boot on, and realized she couldn't. Her ankle was still too swollen. He saw her struggling. He came over, his face a mask of pain neutrality. Here, he said, and he knelt, just as he had that first night. He gently eased her boot onto her good foot, and then found a spare, thick wool sock for her injured one, just for the helicopter. Their hands brushed, and it was unbearable, this polite, sterile distance, just 30 minutes after they had been everything else. The clock on the wall said 10:45 a.m. 3 hours and 15 minutes left. Aaron stood up. He looked at her. He looked at the hut, this tiny, warm prison. And he couldn't just sit here and wait for the end. Helen, he said, his voice rough. She looked up, her eyes wide. I have a request. What? Your ankle, can you walk on it? Just a little? Slowly. I think so, she said, confused. It's sore, but I can put a little weight on it. Why? He went to the corner and grabbed his own sturdy walking stick. He handed it to her. There's a place, a spot. It's not far, just up the path. Before they come, would you walk with me? One last time, her heart, which had felt like a cold stone in her stomach, suddenly leaped. One last time. It wasn't a question. It was a plea. She nodded, unable to speak. Yes. He helped her into her jacket. He put on his own. He opened the door of the hut. And the world that greeted them, It was beautiful. It was painfully beautiful. The storm had scrubbed the entire world clean. The air was so crisp and cold. It was like drinking liquid ice. The sky was a deep, impossible, cloudless blue. The morning sun, which had been absent for 2 days, streamed through the wet, dripping pines, and it turned every hanging drop of water into a tiny, shattering diamond. It was a perfect day. A perfect day for an execution. They walked, slowly. Helen leaned heavily on the walking stick, but every few steps on the rougher terrain, Aaron's hand was there, on her back, on her elbow, steadying her. His touch was a constant, low-level thrum against her skin. It was both a comfort and an exquisite torture, because every time he touched her, she knew it was one of the last times. They didn't talk. What was there to say? They just walked. They listened to the crunch of their boots on the damp earth. They listened to the birds, who had come out after the storm, singing their hearts out in the trees. It was the loudest silence Helen had ever been a part of. The path was narrow, winding up through the trees. After about 15 minutes, it opened up. It was a small clearing, a small, flat-topped rock square at the top of the mountain. It wasn't the summit, but it was an overlook, and the view, it took her breath away. The whole world was spread out below them, range after range of blue-green mountains, fading into the distance. The valleys were filled with soft, white mist, like a river of clouds. "Oh, Aaron," she breathed. It's incredible." "Yeah," he said, his voice quiet. He walked to the edge and just looked. She hobbled over and stood beside him, not touching, just beside. They stood there for a long time. 11:30 a.m. This was our spot, he said, his voice so low. She almost didn't catch it. "Oh," she said, her stomach twisting. You and Mika?" "Yeah," he said. He kicked at a small stone. We used to hike up here all the time. This was her favorite place in the world." Helen felt small, an intruder, a forgery. "Aaron, she started. "I shouldn't be here. This is your place." It's her place. He turned to her, and his face, it was raw. "No," he said, his voice fierce. That's what I needed to tell you. When I used to come up here after she was gone, I came up here to apologize, to be with her ghost. This place was a graveyard." He looked around at the blue sky, at the sun. "But today, standing here with you," he shook his head, a look of dazed wonder on his face. I'm not thinking about her. I'm not apologizing. I'm not sad." He turned and faced her, his eyes locking on hers. "I'm just grateful. I'm just here with you, Helen. And this place, it doesn't feel like a graveyard anymore. It feels alive." Tears were welling in her eyes. He took a step. "Helen, we're almost out of time. This might be the last time I can be honest. The last time this is real." He took her hands. Not her hand. Hands. Both of them. His, so large and warm and rough. Hers, small and trembling. He started, and he had to stop. He swallowed. The word was a stone. I love you." The words hit her like a physical blow. Not, "I care about you." Not, "This was special." "I love you." Tears, which had been pooling, now just broke. They streamed down her face. I know it's insane," he rushed on, terrified by her tears. "I know it's only been 3 days. It's impossible. But it's the truest thing I've said in 3 years." And she laughed. A broken, wet choke laugh. "Aaron," she said, her voice a sob. I love you, too." And he just surged forward. This wasn't the kiss from last night. That was fire and desperation. This was a goodbye. He wrapped his arms around her, and she buried her face in his chest, and they just held each other. He wasn't kissing her. He was memorizing her. His hand was in her hair, his face buried in her neck, and she was just clinging to him, clinging to this solid, warm, real man on top of this mountain, with the whole world at their feet. What if, she whispered into his jacket, what if we had met 20 years ago, before all of this? He pulled back, just enough to look at her. His eyes were red. We probably would have just had coffee and gone on with our lives." "Why? Why do you say that?" "Because he said, and his voice was thick with a terrible, beautiful sadness. Because it wouldn't have been this. This is so painful because it matters. It's real because it's impossible, Helen. We're not 20. We're broken. We've lived. We have baggage and pasts. And that's why this means something. She knew he was right. This wasn't a silly fling. This was a rescue, a mutual one. The love of people who know what loss is. They walked back to the hut, hand in hand. It was a walk of the condemned. Every step, thud, was a second. Every step, thud, was closer to 2 p.m., 1:30 p.m. They were back in the hut. He made lunch. It was absurd. He opened a can of soup. He cut 2 slices of bread. They sat at the small table, and they just wished for time to stop. They didn't eat. They just pushed the soup around in their bowls. They were just looking at each other, trying to burn the image of the other's face into their memory. His sad, kind eyes. Her, just her. And then, thwup, thwup, thwup. It started. A low, rhythmic beating, far away, but getting closer. Thwup, 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 thwup. It was a sound of real world. The sound of the end. Aaron's spoon just slipped from his fingers. It clattered into his bowl. His face, it just crumpled. Here they come, he whispered. Yes, Helen said, and she put her hand on the table. He didn't take it. He just stood up. He had to be the guide. She packed her last few things. She was ready, but she wasn't. She would never be ready. The sound was deafening now. A roaring mechanical monster descending from the sky. The helicopter didn't land. It hovered, just 20 feet above the clearing, the downdraft whipping the trees into a frenzy. The door slid open, and 2 men, 2 strangers in bright orange paramedic uniforms, dropped to the ground. They were loud. They were wrong. Mr. Cole? Aaron? One of them yelled over the noise. I'm Aaron, he yelled back. Where's the patient? She's here. They were in the hut, and suddenly the sacred, quiet, tiny space was full of loud, competent, wrong men. Ma'am, I'm Rick. We're going to get you out of here. How's the ankle? It's fine, she said, but her voice was gone. They were checking her. They were all business. They were preparing a stretcher, a harness. We're just going to put you in this harness, ma'am. We'll winch you up. It's real fast. It was fast. It was all happening too fast. They were leading her to the door. She was at the doorway. 1 foot in, 1 foot out. She stopped. She turned back. Aaron, he was just standing by his fireplace. His hands clenched at his sides. He was watching her. His face was a mask of just loss. Aaron, she yelled over the helicopter. He met her eyes. Thank you, she cried. Thank you for everything. Ma'am, we have to go, the paramedic yelled. I'll come back, she shouted at him. I'll come back. I promise. And he gave her a small, broken smile, a smile of resignation, a smile that said, I know you can't. Be well, Helen, he yelled. Be well, Aaron. The paramedic took her arm and pulled her out. She was clipped in. She was rising. She was being lifted off the ground, into the sky, into the belly of the machine. She looked down, and he had walked out. He was standing in the middle of the clearing, just standing there. He didn't wave. He just watched her go. The door of the helicopter slid shut. The noise was inside, and as the machine banked and turned and rose, she looked out the small, round window. She saw the hut, the clearing, the tiny, solitary figure, getting smaller and smaller and smaller until he was just gone, vanished into the green. The first thing that hits you is the noise. Inside the helicopter, the sound isn't just a sound. It's a physical thing. It's a high-frequency, brain-rattling assault that vibrates through the metal floor, up your spine, and into your teeth. It is the sound of the real world, and it is furious. Helen was strapped into a small, functional seat. A young man in a bright orange uniform. Rick, he'd shouted over the rotor wash, smiled at her. It was a professional smile. Empty. Wild ride, huh, ma'am? Good thing Mr. Cole was up there. Not many people could have gotten you out of that ravine. Helen just nodded. She couldn't speak. She felt like a specimen, a patient. She had been Helen for 3 days, a woman who was desired and seen and loved. And now, in the space of 10 minutes, she was ma'am again. She was a line on a report. The hospital was a different kind of violence. The violence of silence, of antiseptic smells, of fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency designed to drive you insane. It was the smell of her old life, her nursing career, but it no longer felt familiar. It felt hostile. It felt cold. A doctor, a young man who looked like he was still in college, read her chart. "Well, Mrs. Richards," he said, tapping a pen against her x-rays, "you are one lucky lady. No fractures. Just a very, very severe sprain. We'll get you on some crutches. You'll be sore for a few weeks, but could have been a whole lot worse. Could have been worse." Helen almost laughed. Worse? Worse was the sterile, white room she was in. Worse was a Mrs. Richards title, an identity that felt like a cheap, ill-fitting suit. Those 3 days, even the fall, even the pain, that was the best thing that had happened to her in 20 years. And then the real reentry began. They handed her the phone. "You need to call your family." Her family, right. Her hands were trembling as she dialed Ken's number. He was still on his business trip. He picked up on the 4th ring. "Ken Richards?" His voice was curt. "Busy. Ken, it's me? Helen? What's wrong? I'm literally walking into a client dinner. I had an accident, Ken. I'm at the hospital." A pause, and then a sigh of annoyance. "My God, Helen. The car? Did you wreck the car?" "No," she whispered, the fluorescent lights humming above her. The car's fine. I was hiking. I went hiking and I fell." "You what?" His voice was a sharp bark of disbelief. "Hiking? Alone? What on earth were you thinking? Are you okay? Is this bad? Am I going to have to fly home? Because this dinner is..." "No!" She cut him off, the word like ice. "No, Ken. You don't have to come home. It's just a sprain. Hey, a ranger. Help me. I'm fine." The first lie. It was so easy, and it tasted like ash. A ranger? Well, thank God for that. Okay. So you're fine. Good. That's good. Look, I really have to go. They're all waiting for me. You'll be home when I get back on Sunday." "Yes, Ken," she said, her voice dead. "I'll be home." "Great. Okay. Well, feel better. And let's not do that again, okay? Love you. Bye." Click. He was gone. Love you. The words were just a sound he made, a period at the end of a sentence. Helen sat there, holding the dead phone, and she felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. She felt the cold. The icy, sterile cold of her real life, rushing back in, extinguishing the fire. She called her son Ryan. His response was different, but no less painful. It wasn't annoyance. It was disappointment. "Mom? Seriously? Hiking? By yourself? What if that ranger hadn't been there? What were you thinking? You've got to be more careful. You're not 20 anymore, Mom. You're not a woman. You're a mother. You're a responsibility." That's what he was saying. "I know, Ryan. I know. It's fine. I'm glad you're okay. But, geez, don't do that again, okay? Don't be a person. Don't be anything but what I expect you to be." "I won't," she lied. I'm fine." A cab took her home. The cab ride was a blur of wrongness. Cars, traffic, noise, billboards. She paid the driver, hobbled on her new, awkward crutches up the immaculate stone walkway, and opened the front door to her beautiful $1 million house. And the silence that met her, it was not the silence of the mountain. It was not the living, breathing silence of the hut, filled with wind and fire and life. This was the silence of a tomb. The air was still. It smelled of nothing. Faint lemon polish, maybe. She stood in her grand 2-story foyer. White marble floors. A massive, abstract painting on the wall that Ken's decorator had insisted on. She looked at her life. The gleaming, high-tech kitchen. The gray and white living room with the white sofas and the glass tables. It was a set. It was a page from a magazine. It wasn't real. She had been more real, more alive, in that one-room wooden hut, with a tin mug and a can of stew, than she had ever been in this mausoleum. The week that followed was a special kind of hell. Ken came home on Sunday. He found her on the sofa, her foot propped up. "Hey, there she is," he said, dropping his bags. He kissed the top of her head. It was the kiss of a man, checking a box. "Glad you're okay. See? All better." He didn't ask what happened. Not really. He didn't ask why she was hiking. He didn't ask how she felt. He just went back to being Ken. That night, they had dinner. He read the Wall Street Journal. She pushed food around on her plate. "Welcome home," she said. "Good to be home," he said, his eyes on the stock ticker on the TV. The silence between them, it wasn't full. It wasn't electric. It was dead. A vacuum. And that night, she lay in her king-size bed. Alone. Ken was in the guest room. He said he didn't want to jostle her ankle with his tossing and turning. She lay there, in her 800-thread count Egyptian cotton sheets. And they were cold, and she was haunted. She closed her eyes. And she wasn't in her sterile, gray bedroom. She was there. She could feel the heat from the cast-iron stove. She could smell wood smoke. She could feel his hand, his rough, calloused, warm hand. She could hear his voice, his real voice, the one from that last morning. "I love you. I love you, too." It wasn't a dream. It was real. It was the only real thing. And she was here. A sob, a dry, ragged, painful thing, tore itself from her chest. She pulled the expensive, useless silk-filled pillow over her face, and she grieved. She cried for him, for herself, for the loss. How do you go back? How do you exist in this? After that, you don't. It took her 1 week. 1 week of the nothingness. 1 week of her husband's polite, friendly, devastating indifference. 1 week of the silent, empty, perfectly clean house. And she realized he had said, "Be well, Helen." He hadn't said, "Wait for me." He hadn't said, "I'll find you." He had let her go. He, a man who had lost everything, had found her and let her go. She remembered his face. That look of resignation. He didn't believe her. He didn't believe she would ever come back. He thought she was just a moment, an interruption. And a new feeling, a feeling that burned through the grief, took hold. A hot, bright, furious determination. He didn't get to be noble. He didn't get to decide for her. He didn't get to disappear. She went online. Aaron Cole, Mountain Guide. Nothing. Hut 4, phone number. Nothing. It was off the grid. There was only one way. On Friday morning, she went to Ken. He was tying his tie. "Ken," she said, her voice steady. I'm not feeling right since the fall. I found an art therapy workshop. A wellness retreat. It's up in the mountains, just for a couple of days." It was the perfect lie. It was exactly the kind of thing a bored, wealthy housewife would do. He barely looked at her. He just adjusted his collar. "I see," he said. His voice was just nothing. Not curious. Not suspicious. Just flat. "Well, be careful. Don't go hiking." "I won't," she said. The lack of interest. It was the most painful and most liberating thing he could have ever done. It was her exit visa. She drove. Her ankle was still screaming, but she didn't care. She got to the base of the mountain. She couldn't hike. Not a real climb. But she found a convenience store. The old man was there. I need to get to Hut 4, she said. "Hut's closed for the season, ma'am." Aaron, he left. Helen's heart just stopped. Left? Yeah. About a week ago. Just packed up, came down, said he was moving on, heading north, I think he said. Didn't say where. "No," Helen whispered. "No, he can't be." She had to see. She paid a young local kid with a 4-wheel drive ATV. Just get me to the trailhead, as close as you can." She hobbled. She used the crutch. She used the walking stick she had stolen from the hospital. It was agony. Every step was pain. But she got there. It took her 2 hours. She came into the clearing, and it was just as she'd left it. Silent. Empty. The hut was dead. The chimney was cold. The windows were dark. "Aaron," she called out, her voice a thin, pathetic sound. "Aaron, it's me." Only the wind. She hobbled to the door. It was locked and tacked to the heavy wooden door. was a small white envelope with a single word on it. Helen, her hand, was shaking so violently she could barely pull the nail. She tore it open. It was a small piece of notepaper. His handwriting, strong, clear. My dearest Helen, those 3 days, they were the most beautiful time of my life. A gift I never thought I would have again. But you were right. You have a place to return to. A life, a family. I am a ghost. I can't ask you to live in a graveyard with me. Go back to your life. Be happy. For me, be well, Helen. Hey. She read it, and she sank to the steps. She didn't understand. No, she whispered. He hadn't stayed. He hadn't waited. He had run. He had left her. He had rejected her. The note said, be happy. But the act, he was gone. For the first time, she realized the magnitude of what she had lost. He was gone, and she was alone on the steps of the hut in the cold mountain silence. And she just sat there and cried. So picture that. Picture Helen sitting on the cold, hard wooden steps of that empty hut, the place that was, for 72 hours, the only real place in the universe. Her ark, her sanctuary, her home. And now it's just a box. It's an empty, locked, cold wooden box. She's holding this note, this piece of paper that is, in its own way, more brutal than a fall, more painful than the jagged rock that met her ankle. She reads it again, and the grief, that profound, bottomless, crushing grief, it begins to do something. It begins to curdle. It begins to sharpen. It's the first stage, right? The sadness. But what comes after? Rage. A hot, bright, furious rage that burns away the tears. How dare he? She whispers, her voice a low, animal growl she doesn't even recognize. She crushes the note in her fist. How dare he make this choice for me? Let's just analyze what he did. He ran. He didn't wait. He didn't even give her a chance to come back. He didn't give her a chance to choose. He, Aaron Cole, the man who had lost his own wife, who knew what loss felt like, he had looked at Helen, and he had decided for her what her life was. He had decided that he wasn't worth it. He had decided that she wasn't strong enough. He had decided that her place to return to, was with Ken, in that mausoleum. She stands up, her ankles screaming in protest. She doesn't care. You coward, she yells, and the word is just eaten by the trees. There's no one to hear. She's yelling at a ghost. His ghost. I told you, she cries, tears of pure, hot fury now streaming down her face. I told you I had no place to go back to. Were you even listening? She reads the note again, her hands shaking. I am a ghost. I can't ask you to live in a graveyard with me. She almost laughs. A broken, hysterical sound. You idiot, she whispers. You beautiful, noble idiot. I was the ghost. I was the one living in the graveyard. You were the only real thing. You were the one who made me alive. And in that moment, in that one crystal clear, agonizing moment, she understands the entire beautiful, stupid tragedy of it. This wasn't a rejection of her. It was a sacrifice. He, in his own broken, noble, and ultimately patronizing way, thought he was saving her. He thought he was a monster, a haunted man. He thought his darkness would taint her. He loved her. He loved her so much that he let her go in the most painful way possible. He ran, so she would have no choice but to go back to the life he thought she deserved. He didn't know. He didn't understand. He didn't know that the life he'd sent her back to was a lie. He had just performed the most noble and the most arrogant act of his life. And she hates him for it. And she loves him for it. So much that her knees buckle. She slumps back down on the steps. The rage is gone. And all that's left is the cold. The sun is high, but the mountain air it's just cold. And he is gone. She has no idea where. North, the old man said. That's nothing. That's Canada. That's anywhere. He's unfindable. He wanted to be unfindable. He had erased himself for her. The magnitude of that, it's too big. She sits for maybe an hour. just sitting, and she feels everything. She feels a love. She feels a loss. She feels a rage. And she feels stupid. She's sitting on a cold step on a mountain, crying over a man she's known for 3 days. Her husband thinks she's at an art therapy retreat. Her life is a joke. It's a badly written play. And she is the fool. Slowly. So slowly. She stands up. She needs to go. There's nothing here. This is a graveyard now. He was right about that. By leaving, he had killed this place. She carefully smooths out the note. She folds it, and she puts it in her pocket. The pocket right over her heart. She turns, and she gives the empty hut one last look. A look of love and hate and goodbye. And she begins a long, painful, agonizing hobble back down the mountain, back to her car, back to the real world. But the woman who is walking down this mountain is not the woman who came up it. She's not the woman who was rescued. And she is definitely not the woman who came back here, looking for a fairy tale. She is someone new. She is angry, and she is awake. The drive home is a 5-hour blur. She doesn't cry. She doesn't listen to the radio. She just drives, and she thinks. She thinks about Ken, his boredom, his indifference, his love you, bye. She thinks about his sigh, that sigh of annoyance when he thought she needed him. That sigh was a real end of her marriage. She hadn't known at the time. She thinks about her son, Ryan. You're not 20 anymore, Mom. His patronizing, loving dismissal. His terror that she might be a person, that she might be anything other than Mom. She's been living her whole life in a series of boxes. The wife box, the mother box. And for 72 hours, she had lived. And now she's going back to boxes. Only she's not. She can't. The lid doesn't fit anymore. She doesn't fit. She gets home. It's 9 p.m. on a Saturday night. The house is dark. Of course. Ken is at the club. At dinner. Something. He's not here. She stands in the grand marble tomb of her foyer. She looks at the stupid abstract painting. She looks at the cold glass table. And she feels nothing. No, not nothing. She feels pity for the woman who lived here, the woman who polished this glass, who fluffed these pillows, who tended this mausoleum. That woman is gone. That woman died in a ravine, or maybe she was born in a ravine. And so 6 months pass. The original story, it glosses over this, right? Her daily life returned to normal on the surface. And it did. That's the most incredible and the most deceptive part on the surface. To Ken, who returned from golf and work, Helen was just Helen. She was quieter. Maybe she made his coffee. She paid the bills. The machine kept running. But inside, Helen was waging a war. The memory of those 3 days, it wasn't a soft, glowing, bittersweet thing she took out and looked at. No, it was a furnace. It was a fire deep in her belly. It was fuel, and she started to use it. Her ankle healed, and she started walking every single day. First, just around the block, then a mile, then 5. She joined a gym. She got strong. She stopped being soft. The woman who couldn't make it 2 hours up a mountain. That woman vanished. She was preparing for what? She didn't know. But she was forging herself. She reactivated her nursing license. She started volunteering 2 days a week at a free clinic downtown, the part of town Ken referred to as unfortunate. And she worked. She drew blood. She took vitals. She listened to people's stories. She was useful. She was seen. She was Nurse Richards. She wasn't Helen, Ken's wife. She was her. And Ken, he noticed, he couldn't not notice. One night, he came home. She was just getting back. In her cheap blue scrubs. Helen, he said in the confusion on his face. What are you wearing? Is that a costume? And she just looked at him. This man. This stranger. And she wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She just was. I was volunteering, Ken, at the clinic. The what? The clinic? What on earth? Why? I give thousands to the hospital gala every year. I know, she said. And she walked past him. You're different, he called after her. She stopped, her hand on the newel post. You're distant. You're not here. Not really. And she turned and she looked at him. And for the first time she saw him, not as her husband, but just as a man. A weak man. A frightened man. A man who clung to his things. His golf, his clubs, his money, because that's all he had. And she felt sorry for him. Yes, Ken, she said. Her voice, it wasn't cold. It was just true. Yes, I think you're right. And she walked upstairs. She went into her bathroom. She looked in the mirror, and for the first time she didn't see Helen Richards, 54-year-old housewife. She saw Helen. Her eyes were clear. She looked strong. She looked alive. She took the note, Aaron's note. She kept it in her jewelry box. She opened it. She read it. Be well, Helen. And she finally understood it wasn't a rejection. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a command. It was a blessing. It was permission. It was the key. The love that began on that mountain. It didn't end on that mountain. He didn't trap her in that memory. He set her free. He had given her life back in every way. He saved her from the ravine, and then he saved her from this house, from this tomb. And Helen, she looked at her reflection, and she smiled, a real smile, and she knew exactly what she had to do. She stood there in that vast, sterile bathroom, a single folded note in her hand, and she looked at her own reflection. The smile that spread across her face, it wasn't a happy smile. Not yet. It was a smile of a general who has just seen the entire battlefield for the first time. It was a smile of a woman who had just been handed a map and a weapon and a very, very clear target. And the target was her own life. Be well, Helen. It wasn't a wish. It wasn't a sad, poetic goodbye. It was a command. It was a commission. It was the last and most important instruction she would ever receive from Aaron Cole. And Helen Richards, for the first time in her adult life, was a woman who was going to follow an order. The original story, the one you might be thinking of, ends there. It ends with a woman returning to her normal life, her heart holding a quiet, secret treasure. It ends with her just accepting a passive, bittersweet memory. But that's not what happened, because the Helen who came down from that mountain, the Helen who had been forged in rage and grief, and for the first time, love, she was not a passive woman. She was a nurse. She was an executor. And she had just diagnosed her own life as terminal. And the only cure was an amputation. The very next day, Helen Richards, 54-year-old housewife and ghost, went to see a lawyer, not a divorce mediator, a shark, the best, most ruthless, most terrifying family law attorney in the city. And she didn't walk in crying. She didn't walk in with a story of a neglectful husband. She walked in like a CEO, dissolving a hostile partnership. She brought everything. She brought 20 years of bank statements, tax returns, brokerage accounts. She had been the domestic engineer, remember? She had paid every bill. She knew where every single penny was buried. This wasn't an art therapy retreat. This was a war plan. And when Ken finally got served the papers, he was stunned. He wasn't heartbroken. He wasn't sad. He was furious. He was furious because his appliance had just staged a rebellion. He came home that night, the papers clutched in his hand, his face a mass of purple, entitled rage. Helen, what is this? What is this joke? And Helen, she was sitting at the kitchen island, the island she had polished 10,000 times. She was drinking a cup of coffee, and she just looked at him. It's not a joke, Ken. It's a dissolution. You can't, he sputtered. You can't do this. This is insane. This is financial suicide. Our assets they're intertwined. We are a team. And she took a sip of her coffee. No, Ken, she said, and her voice was so calm, so clear, it cut him right to the bone. No, you are a business. A very, very successful business. And she stood up. I quit. Is there another man? He demanded, the oldest, most pathetic question in the book. And Helen, she thought of a log cabin. She thought of the smell of wood smoke. She thought of a rough, callous hand on her face. She thought of a man who had loved her enough to run, so she could be free. And she smiled. A small, real, secret smile. Yes, Ken, she said. Yes, there is. He looked shattered, and in that moment, she almost pitied him. Who? He whispered. Me, she said. She picked up her one small, packed suitcase, and she walked out of the house. She didn't look back. She left the house, the cars, the stuff, the tomb. She walked away from everything, and she had nothing, which meant, for the first time, she had everything. The phone call to Ryan, that was the hard part. That was the real amputation. He was, as she expected, confused, hurt, angry. Mom, you left Dad? What about us? What about our family? You can't just do that. You can't just break everything. And Helen, she sat in the tiny, sterile one-bedroom apartment she was renting. Her first month's rent paid for by a credit card. And she cried. Oh, Ryan, she said, her voice thick. My sweet boy. I have been mom for 20 years. And I have been wife for 25. And I loved it. I did. But somewhere in there, I forgot how to be Helen. I lost her. I don't even know who she is, but Mom, Ryan, listen to me. There is no us if I don't exist. There is no Mama. Helen is dead. I have to go. I have to go and find her. And I have to be well. And so she did. The 6 months that followed, they weren't easy. They were brutal. And they were glorious. She got a job. A real job. A 12-hour shift on your feet. Life and death. Hard job. At the clinic. The real clinic. She came home to her tiny, empty apartment. And she would ache. Her feet. Her back. Her heart. But it was a good ache. It was the ache of living.